Well, hello. I hope that noise went on the recording. My name is Jason, as you already know, because you all work with me. Today I'm going to be talking about designing for Android and how that differs from designing for iOS. So there'll be some do's and don'ts and all sorts of other things. So these are some things you might already know. They are sort of a few basics of designing for small screens. I'm going to go over these quite quickly because these are not necessarily related to Android and iOS differences. So the first point is having a large tap area whenever you're clicking on things. So the Android guidelines and research tells you that should be about 9mm, and in Android units that's 48 dp. I think the research specifically says between 7 and 10mm, but 48 dp is roughly 9mm. And between tappable items, you should have a gap of about 8 dp, which is about 1.5 mm. Within your design for apps, you should prioritise the content. That should be the most important thing. It shouldn't be any kind of branding or things that get in the way of that. It's all about the content. You should make sure that you know the Android framework very well to help people put in content, so minimising what they need to put in, so things like their name, their photo, their location, any other accounts that they've got. You shouldn't need them to have to type all that in because the phone already knows it and the app can get them out. You should also cache everything because phones have absolutely rubbish internet connections. When you're out and about, unless you're on Wi-Fi, you can't trust that you have an internet connection. So yeah, cache everything, make sure you use as few network requests as possible, and make good use of having data pushed to you as well. And if you're someone that is designing for Android, this isn't entirely related to the title, but make sure that you are actually using an Android device. So, back to Android specifically. Android design is not kind of taking a nice iPhone design, just kind of wiping away the iPhone and then putting it on Android and moving the tab bar to the top. It's not that. It doesn't work. Now, why doesn't it work? Well, Android users interact with devices in a different way. They have different behaviours that they've subconsciously learned. And one of those is, especially around the use of the back button here. It's really funny watching an iOS user try and use an Android device. They get lost in places and they get stuck on screens and go, how do I get out of the screen? Because they don't know that the back button exists. And they expect kind of the back button to be normally at the top left. That's sometimes there. So a little side note, this isn't kind of so prevalent now, but a few years ago, loads of designers put Android back buttons, put iOS back buttons in their Android designs. So this is the Ocado app. They had a terrible iPhone. Don't do that, it's bad. Android has a different concept, which is visually similar, but fundamentally different in the way it interacts, and it's called an up button, and we'll have a look at that a little bit later. So yes, we'll get rid of that horrible thing with the terrible fire effect. I always forget that animation is there. Yes, so the back button, really important. So to help explain why, I just need to first explain the concept of a view stack. So as a user kind of navigates through an app, they build up a stack of views, a stack of screens that they've been on, and that can include screens that, on Android, that can include screens that aren't actually part of your app. So you could be doing something in one app, that could take you to another app, and then you could end up back there. And by pressing the back button, you can then go through all of those things. Matt is going to talk, after this talk, a little bit about intents and how you can go between different apps. And if you don't want to listen to Matt, there's also a link. You can go to that bit.ly/intents2, and that's a nice little article about how to do that. So yeah, you can think of the view stack kind of like browsing the web. As you click on a link, you go to a new page and then a new page, but you can always go back to where you've been by pressing the back button. There we go. As you navigate as well, Android has some built-in animations that kind of show transition between states. So as you're on one screen and you go to a new screen, the existing screen will slide out to the left and the new one will slide in from the right. And then when you go back, the opposite animation happens. So it's important when you're implementing screens and moving between them that you don't break those animations. So if you go 4 levels deep into something and then you want to go back to where you started, you shouldn't, the animation shouldn't look like you're going somewhere new, but should actually look like you're going back somewhere where you've already been. So the up button. So unlike the back button, the up button doesn't take you to where you've just been, but it takes you kind of one up in the structural hierarchy, or one up in the kind of information architecture. In case you can't see it, it's there. In case you can't see that circle, it wiggles around a bit as well. So a good way to explain how an up button is different to a back button, because you're probably thinking that in quite a lot of situations, the up and the back are going to do the same thing. So here is a massive thing, a massive, what are those things called? Flow charts, something like that.
Flow diagram.
Flow diagram. So imagine you've gone into this app and you're looking up a list of books. You see a book you like, it's called Book One, it's got a really interesting title. So you tap on it, you go into details about that book. Now in the screen, you can press the back button and you go back to the list of books, or you can press the up button and you go back to the list of books.
Mm-hmm.
Now say you tapped on book 2 because you go, ooh, that looks interesting. In this situation, the back and the up button would take you to 2 different places. So the back button would take you back to the previous book you're looking at, but the up button would go back to the list of books. Now something even more different, if you then tapped on the movie that's in Users Also View, movie 1, sounds exciting. If you press the back button in that case, you go back to book 2, but if you press the up button, you would actually end up in a list of movies, somewhere completely different from where you started. So that's kind of explains the differences between back and up. So if Android design is not just kind of whacking iPhone type tabs at the top, what do we do? Well, there are kind of 2 different UI components that we can use: navigation drawers and action bars. So the navigation drawer, there's my notes, they won't going to appear there. Pretty simple. This picture kind of shows how it looks. It was made popular by Facebook, so it's what you're seeing in the Facebook app. It's also known as the burger menu, and that's because these 3 little lines in the top left look like a burger. So this kind of drawer that comes out from the left is activated by either tapping on that icon of the burger or swiping out from the left. And in that menu that comes out, you kind of show your top level items. So as a kind of design cheat, this won't work in every situation, but as a rough guide, when taking something from iOS and moving it to Android, you can take your icons that you've got in the tab bar and put them in the navigation drawer. Now, what you should only show in your drawer is those top level items. And if you are in any of those kind of parts of the app, you show the burger menu. But if you drill down any deeper past those items, you don't show the burger menu. Instead, you show the up arrow that we saw earlier. The Southern Rail app actually came out a few weeks ago as one app that breaks that and doesn't show the app icons but always shows the burger menu. There are specific ways that should look. If you go to bit.ly/navdrawer, I can tell you all about it. Getting clapped already. Now, something Google do say is that you can use fixed tabs at the top, and there's again a certain Android style that you should use with those for your top level navigation, but only if you've got 3 or less items. And I'd say that it should only really be if those 3 or less items are really closely related in what they're showing, as everywhere else it's used in Android is for filtering in between different kinds of the same content. So the action bar is a really key part of every single Android app. It comes as standard when you start a new Android project. Top left, it contains the app icon, followed by either the up button or the burger menu if you've got one, as well as several context-specific icons. That's really hard to say, context-specific icons. So these are things that are related to what you're currently looking at. So if you're looking at a list of emails, it'll be something like a new email. If you're in an email, it'll be something like what we've got here, which is archiving or deleting or marking as unread. It's not used for navigation. I've seen some apps put their navigation in the action bar. That's really confusing for users because that's not what they expect. You can also, with these three little dots in the top right, have kind of less important actions in there. So in Gmail there's a whole load of stuff. Now, older Android menus, which were scrapped since Android 3, which was released over 3 years ago, in February 2011, look like that. Ooh. So this was activated by pressing a physical menu button on the phone, and then this appeared and dropped, and that got so misused by designers that Android just scrapped it and said no more. So some phones still have that kind of physical hardware menu button, and in those cases the three little dots icon isn't shown when they press that, and it comes up, but that was, again, Google phased that out 3 years ago. So unless you're Samsung, who refused to give up that button up until a few weeks ago, most of your users would see the three little dots. So I've bashed tabs a bit, but they are useful in some places. Like I was saying, they're useful for filtering content. So tab bars can either be fixed at the top, like they are here, where you can go between kind of different filters of your music. But in these, the Play Store, a nice Flappy Bird playing there, you can actually swipe the tabs across at the top, and as you swipe between your content, so you can, you can swipe up and down, move the list, but you can also swipe left and right and go in between the tabs, and that's something that Android users expect when they see tabs. So if you can't do that with tab, if you've implemented a design where you can't swipe between tabs, then you're not following the guidelines properly. Here's another example. This is Twitter. Again, it lets you swipe between 3 different views of feeds. So it's swiping between the same sort of content. Another really good example, this is a medical app. So you're on a page that's all about acupuncture. And across the top you've got some tabs that show you different bits of information about acupuncture. Again, this is the Southern Rail app I was talking about earlier. Notice the burger menu in the top left. It shouldn't be there. This is really great. So this screen is where you are just about to plan the journey, and you say I'm leaving from, and it's giving you choices of stations. So the tabs across, for those that can't read the screen because it's really bad, say near you, saved, recent, or search. That's a really good way of using tabs and filtering the content that you're trying to get to. There are other ways to filter content, using something called a view control. You don't see this very often. These are the only places I could find it on my phone. The one in the left is the calendar app, which lets you change the calendar view between day, week, month, or your diary. So you kind of indicate it by showing the little triangle in the bottom right corner to show that you can press that, drop a menu down, and then filter the content. Icons. Again, this is something that used to go really, really wrong years ago, but developers and designers have got better at this. You can't just take your iOS icon and then whack it on Android. It doesn't look right, because Android has a very specific set of guidelines around how to do that. And there's a lovely link you can follow, bit.ly/Android icons, on how to do that. And there are lots of different icons that this little tool will make for you. So this is a web-based tool where you give it flat images and it spits you out all the icons in all the different sizes that you need. So you kind of don't really have an excuse not to make good icons. Talk about loading modal dialogues. So these are the dialogues that appear and take over the entire screen and go me, 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 me when something's loading. This isn't necessarily Android specific, it's more of a kind of a nice way of mobile design. So here's an example. This is the old Foursquare app. So instead of taking over the whole screen, it actually showed a pretty animation. So this, I think some stuff came out of the pipe here, landed in whatever the girl was holding, and she put it in the machine. It's kind of entertaining for people to watch. You don't have to be kind of that creative with it. You can just show a normal spinner there, but by not showing a mode of dialogue, what it allows you to do, or what it allows the user to do, is to carry on using the app whilst they're waiting for the data. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the intro, it's good to show what you've cached first and always be caching the data. Other dialogues on Android, there's the kind of standard, I've got a question for you, please answer it dialogue. These are okay, they have a place. And that place is only if you tap on something and it needs you to then take action immediately based on that. Again, another good practice thing is try not to ask people to confirm things too much. So only ask them to confirm something if the action is really hard for them to undo, or that action's got serious consequences, like it's going to cost them £10 on their credit card or something. Otherwise, give them the option to undo something. So something Gmail does on mobile, which is really great, is if you press the archive button, it archives the message immediately and then shows you a little message for 5 seconds that says undo. And then once that's gone away, the way to undo it would be to go in the archive. But if you've accidentally pressed it, it gives you time to remedy that mistake. Something I've seen some Android apps do, which is bad, is something like this. But notify users in a very angry way with a dialogue like that. So it completely interrupts the flow of what they're doing. So modal dialogues should never appear like that on Android. They should only ever appear as a direct result of some kind of user interaction. So they get my giant Comic Sans, no. And then the burn effect comes back. A great way of notifying users is with something called toasts. So toasts, the name toast actually comes from the way that MSN Messenger years and years ago used to notify people. So in the bottom right corner of your Windows XP computer, or maybe even Windows NT, a little notification would pop up like something coming out of a toaster, and then pop back down like something going into a toaster. So look, they don't quite look like that on Android, but it's the same sort of principle. A notification that just appears and then disappears. You don't interact with it in any way. So it's kind of good for things that are confirming that something's just happened. So like, you've just archived this message. They're nice and small and unobtrusive. Something that is unique to Android, and you don't get on iOS, are status bar notifications. Or just notifications, as they're known. There are 3 different kinds we're going to look at. There is the ongoing ones, normal ones, and ambient ones. Don't worry about what those mean, that will be explained. So on Android, you kind of pull the top of the screen down and it's shown like this, which you can do on iOS now as well. They stole that a few years ago. So this is great for things like you've got a new message, you've got a new mention on Twitter, you've got a new email, and generally when you tap on one of those notifications, it takes you to the relevant part of that app. So it doesn't just take you to that app, it takes you to the relevant part. Yes, so ongoing notifications. This is for things that are kind of happening in the background. So it's notifying you that something is happening rather than notifying you that something needs your attention. So something like if you're playing music, a little notification should appear at the top, let you know that music is playing in the background, and then if you tap that, it takes you to the music app. If you're downloading something. An interesting one that not a lot of people utilise, which is a shame because it's quite a good pattern, which you can't see in this example, so I'm just going to move some things around. There we go. Unnecessary animation. This little Twitter one, this is a notification letting me know that Twitter's currently updating my profile. So I went into my profile, made some changes, and then pressed update. And instead of Twitter showing me a modal dialogue saying you need to wait here until this network request is finished, which might take 10 minutes on 2G, it said, okay, great, put that notification up there and let me carry on using the Twitter app. Now if that fails, it shows a nice little thing saying failed, tap to retry. If it succeeded, it could either say success, although that's probably not needed, it could just disappear. Okay. Ambient notifications. I've only seen this used in one app, which is the Google Now app. Now Google do actually expose this to developers so you can use it. It's a notification that doesn't appear in the top bar, but when you pull the drawer down, it appears. So it's for kind of information that's not really important to the user, but it's kind of a nice to know. So this second one down here, not the panel one, is an example of an ambient notification. It's just letting you know that the weather is currently 9 degrees. Google now also every now and then tells me about various football scores. Again, I don't need to know that, but it's a nice to know. Expanding notifications. This was added in more recent versions of Android, and it lets you kind of reveal more information by dragging down on that particular iPhone. So if you look at the email one, my top secret GDG plans, if you drag that down, it expands, and you can read more of the email, and then immediately either archive or reply from that. It's a great, I use that all the time because I get a lot of emails that either tell me something really quickly, pull it down, read it and go, great, I can just archive that straight from there and I don't have to disrupt my flow and go into that and then come back out of it. Lists. So, lists in iOS and Android are different. Something that people, or designers often do, is they put these little arrows that you see in iOS in Android lists. So in iOS, they're there to show you that if you tap on that, it will go somewhere. That sort of thing doesn't exist on Android. In case you can't see where it is, it bounces as well. I had fun with the animations. So yeah, you should avoid putting those in Android designs because it kind of confuses users. There's something very similar, something visually very similar, which if you look on the left-hand side, you can see little arrows. So to Android users, that says, if I tap on that, it's going to expand, like the Flight of the Conchords one, and show me more details within that. So if you put that on the right-hand side, the user will immediately be a bit confused, go, ooh, what does that do? And then they'll tap on it, expecting it to expand something, and go, oh, it's taking me somewhere else. Something else that you have to be really aware of when you design for Android is the infinitely number of huge different sizes of screens and densities. Google have a really great article on that, which you can see at bit.ly/Android screens. That will explain it kind of in a lot more depth than I will. But the kind of simplest thing is on Android you don't have a fixed canvas like you pretty much do on iOS. You have one screen that's slightly taller. So when you create designs, you need to think about how they're going to expand. So you shouldn't try and make designs for every single possible screen size because you'll be there forever. So here's an example. As the screen, for example, will get wider, how do you deal with this bit of content with the coffee and the coffee description on it? So you could, for example, tell your developer that the coffee and the text should be anchored to the sides. So as the device gets bigger, the coffee and the text will always be sort of that far from the sides. Or you could say, you know what, the coffee and the text need to stay together, and there should always be that amount of space between them. And as the screen gets bigger, we increase the gap at the sides. These are things you need to kind of include in your documentation for your designs, because if you leave those sorts of decisions up to the developer, it will go very wrong, because developers aren't always great at designing. So a few other little extras. You shouldn't use a splash screen on Android. So a splash screen is the screen that's shown for a few seconds whilst you're opening an app. Splash screens were originally made because the first iPhone was really slow, took ages to open. So Apple gave you a framework where you, whilst waiting for the app to load, you could show an image. And even in their guidelines, they said that that image should be an example of the UI, not a splash screen, but it got massively misused for branding, people that get overexcited about branding. So you shouldn't show those. Instead, you should go straight to the content of the app. If you need to wait for a network connection to refresh, don't show a splash screen, just show what was there already, and get the user straight to what they want to do. For full screen stuff, Some apps think it's great to go full screen, to get rid of the status bar, because it gives them an extra 25 pixels of space. It's really bad. And we've seen earlier in the talk how important the status bar notification stuff is, and if you're taking that away from users, it's really frustrating. Now, of course, those two things kind of differ for games. If you're making a game, it's kind of entirely up to you to define what sort of patterns you're using. So things like splash screens and full screen are totally acceptable in a game because they're very immersive experiences. Double tap or double click, you shouldn't use that anywhere unless you're zooming in on content, either in a map or a photo. So it shouldn't be like double tap on this button to reveal more information. It's just bad, and users are never going to find that functionality. That link there will take you to the Android design guidelines. I first did a talk like this about 3 years ago, and there were no design guidelines from Android. And as I was kind of updating this talk and making some changes, that website was really helpful. I wish that had existed years ago. So if you are a designer that is making Android apps and you haven't read that, go talk to your boss. Say, I need half a day to read the design guidelines. It's really important. They're really helpful. So thank you very much. That's Twitter and internet. Any questions?
I've got a question.
Yeah.
Going back to your thing about the padding and the bit, going back to my Java days, I call it the glue.
Okay.
What's the best way for a designer to indicate how it should appear across multiple different screen sizes?
So something I've seen designers do is they give you the design, just an image, and then over the top of that, some kind of like semi-transparent layer that lets you see the design through, and then annotations on it, either like colours or sizes and spacing, and just adding a text note to that saying these two items should be together. There's no sort of fancy notation, and designers don't like notation anymore.
What I found specifically that was interesting in developer mode, where you can turn all the grid layout things on, and you can see actually how nicely designed the home screens are. And when I went to the H&H app, there was this funny little square in the middle.
It's the loading icon.
Yeah, it's the loading icon. But yeah, it's actually really, really interesting to see how the app's been put together. Super.
No questions?
No questions.